The sun rose slowly over Rome, but the Colosseum never truly slept. Even at dawn, before the crowds arrived, the stones still remembered. Blood had soaked into its pores the day before, darkening the sand, clinging to the walls like a stain that no broom could erase. Beneath the arches, shadows lingered where men had screamed, animals had thrashed, and lives had ended for the sake of noise. The air smelled of iron, sweat, and something older fear that had settled so deeply it felt permanent. Vendors were already awake, shouting for attention, laying out bread, olives, and diluted wine. They prepared for celebration. Behind iron gates, handlers cursed and shoved starved animals into position. Lions paced with ribs visible beneath their skin. Panthers clawed at bars until their paws bled. Elephants stamped and trumpeted, confused and enraged, dragged far from lands they would never see again. From the tunnels below came the sound of metal striking metal. Not practice, not rehearsal, testing, ensuring the blades were sharp enough to do their work quickly or slowly, depending on what the crowd would prefer. And above it all, a sound began to rise, a low murmur at first, then footsteps, then voices. Tens of thousands of Romans pouring into the stands, hungry for the thing their empire had perfected better than any army or law code: death, carefully shaped into entertainment. The Roman arena was never just a place of sport. It was a machine, a system, a carefully engineered space where cruelty was refined, rehearsed, and rewarded. Emperors flooded it with water to stage naval battles. They starved animals to make them savage. They forced prisoners to reenact myths that ended with real corpses dragged across the sand. None of this was accidental. It was policy, control made visible. The cheering wasn't harmless excitement. It was loyalty performed at full volume, a crowd proving, with every roar, that it understood the rules of empire. Today, we step directly into that shadow, not to admire the architecture or the pageantry, but to confront the acts that went too far even for Rome. The spectacle so brutal, so inhumane, that they reveal what the empire truly asked of its people, not just obedience, but participation. Long before emperors sat in marble boxes and crowds filled colossal amphitheaters, the blood began somewhere far quieter. The first gladiatorial combat in Rome did not erupt from imperial ambition, it began at a funeral. In the 64 BC, the sons of a Roman noble chose to honor their dead father, not with speeches or statues, but with violence. They armed 3 pairs of slaves and forced them to fight to the death in the Forum, a cattle market heavy with the stench of smoke and animals. This was not entertainment in the modern sense. It was obligation, a ritual offering to the dead, rooted in the belief that spilled blood can satisfy restless spirits. The idea was older than Rome itself. In regions like Campania, warriors had been killed at graves to accompany the dead into the afterlife. Over time, random sacrifice transformed into combat. Instead of victims chosen by chance, men were paired deliberately. Skill replaced chaos. Death became structured. Rome watched, learned, and adopted the practice with enthusiasm. The Samnites, bitter enemies conquered after long wars, had used such contests often. Roman elites borrowed not only the ritual, but the symbolism. To bury a man with riches showed wealth. To bury him with a blood-soaked spectacle showed power. At first, these combats were rare and solemn. But Rome was a city that understood opportunity. By the 3rd century BC, politicians recognized that these fights could serve more than the dead. They could stabilize the living. Gladiators began appearing at religious festivals. Officially, it was piety. In reality, it was strategy. Violence funded by the state offered as proof that Rome could provide both bread and blood. Even the armor told a story. Fighters wore the identities of conquered peoples. The Samnite with his heavy shield, the Thracian with a curved blade, the Gaul with a long sword. Each fight replayed Rome's victories in miniature. Each death reminded the crowd who ruled and who fell. As the blood flowed, the venues expanded. Wooden stands gave way to permanent amphitheaters. Temporary ritual hardened into permanent habit. What had begun as sacrifice became theater. What had been duty became addiction. Rome had discovered a new weapon, control over not just life and death, but the meaning of death itself. And once that weapon was unsheathed, it was never put away. The roar of the crowd was not reserved for men alone. Some days, it thundered for creatures dragged from the farthest edges of the known world. Lions from North Africa, leopards from the Caucasus, bears from the Alps, crocodiles hauled up from the Nile, even giraffes, creatures so strange Romans struggled to name them. These were not exhibitions of nature, they were executions. The Romans called them Venetians' hunts. But there was no chase, no balance, no respect, only domination. Proof that the empire could seize the wild, cage it, starve it, and destroy it for pleasure. Julius Caesar set the tone in 46 BC when he displayed a giraffe, the first ever seen in Rome. The crowd stared in awe, unable to categorize it. They called it a camelopard, half camel, half leopard. Its uniqueness did not save it. It was eventually thrown into the arena like any other beast. Wonder was temporary. Blood was the point. By the time the Colosseum opened in AD 80, the slaughter had reached industrial scale. Emperor Titus reportedly oversaw the deaths of more than 9,000 animals in a single festival. Archaeological evidence reveals bones marked by prolonged starvation. Lions and bears weakened on purpose to ensure predictable violence. Even elephants, once the terror of Roman legions under Hannibal, were herded into the arena and butchered for cheers. Behind the scenes, the logistics were staggering. Animals had to be trapped alive, transported across deserts and seas, kept barely alive until their final moment. Caravans dragged cages through scorching heat. Ships ferried terrified creatures down rivers and across the Mediterranean. Handlers risked death daily to deliver living trophies to a city that demanded constant novelty. Seeing a panther in the wild was rare and dangerous. Watching one explode from a cage in front of 50,000 screaming spectators was something else entirely. That was power made visible. Some emperors turned these hunts into personal theater. Commodus, flamboyant and insecure, strutted into the arena dressed as Hercules. He slaughtered hundreds of animals himself, animals that had been chained, wounded, or starved to ensure his victory. He wanted to appear divine. What he revealed instead was a fragile ego shielded by absolute authority. The crowd cheered because silence could be deadly. Admiration was optional. Participation was not. Ancient writers noticed what this obsession cost. Pliny the Elder warned that entire species were vanishing from their homelands. Lions, leopards, elephants pushed toward extinction to satisfy Rome's appetite. The arena was not just a theater of death. It was an ecological wrecking ball. But Rome did not measure loss in absence, only in applause. When people imagine gladiators, they often picture noble duels between evenly matched warriors. Reality was far more distorted. Rome loved imbalance. It engineered cruelty through mismatches, absurd rules, and fights designed not for honor, but for humiliation. Some victims were not fighters at all. Condemned criminals were dressed as fools, handed wooden swords, and shoved into the sand against trained gladiators. The crowd laughed as they stumbled, panicked, and died. Execution disguised as comedy. Even standard matchups were crafted for suspense rather than fairness. The retiaries fought with a net and trident, lightly armored, agile, but exposed. His opponent, the secutor, wore a smooth helmet designed specifically to deflect the net. The fight was a puzzle, not a contest. Would speed overcome protection? Would chance decide skill? Other days, the cruelty escalated. One man against several. Entire groups clashing like miniature armies. The sand turned to mud as blood soaked in. Bodies piled up not as tragedy, but as spectacle.